This is Tall Tale TV, your podcast for sci-fi and fantasy short stories. All on St. Mark's Eve by Rick Kennett. In the middle of the 19th century, divorce was a social stigma, messy, complicated, and above all, expensive. Murder was easier. At least, so it seemed to Mrs. Catherine Baxter, the young and attractive wife of an elderly retired merchant. Lively and vivacious, and with a love of dancing and the theater, she felt eternally chained by her husband's reclusive nature and recurring illnesses. Rumor about the village had it that she only married him for his money. If that were so, Catherine had been terribly short-changed. That they did not seem to have much in common was plain enough, and their arguments were both numerous and raucous. Her few nights out, always taken alone, and on nights her husband fell asleep early through exhaustion and illness, she thought of as escapes. It was during one of these escapes to a country ball that she met a good-looking doctor of her own age by the name of Henderson. Gossip soon whispered of clandestine meetings with this young doctor, and how Mrs. Baxter was longing, more than ever now, for her husband's death. The sight and sound, and particularly the smell of old Baxter when sick, nauseated and infuriated her. His pallor, his hacking cough, his constant bedridden condition, and perpetually drinking of medicines and swallowing of pills. Whether the idea of murder first occurred to Catherine or to her paramour, later neither could remember. Putting the thought into action, she persuaded her ailing husband to give up his own doctor on the pretext that he was not doing him any good, and consult her medical lover. So Dr. Henderson, smiling, kindly Dr. Henderson, became Mr. Baxter's new physician, coming every day in his sulky with phials and seething mixtures, so strangely different to the medicines administered by his predecessor. Not long after this, Mr. Baxter grew steadily more ill, growing paler and weaker. Indeed, the servants in the house implored Mrs. Baxter to reinstate the original doctor, but she would not hear of it. They also noticed that the worse the master became, the more cheerful was Mrs. Baxter's demeanor. By now, the two lovers had grown less circumspect and were openly socializing with each other at dances, the theater, and glamorous parties. One evening, while attending a soirée given by the fashionable and somewhat bizarre Mrs. Salisbury, their hostess, dressed in silks of red and yellow, approached and with a cryptic smile and a nod, said, "The 24th of April is at hand, my dear, the eve of St. Mark's." "Indeed?" said Catherine politely, but exchanged puzzled glances with her partner, the doctor, for neither understood to what she referred. "Ah, the younger generation's neglect of tradition," Mrs. Salisbury sighed, realizing the problem. "When I was a girl, it was quite the thing on the eve of St. Mark's for those with nerves strong enough to watch at the midnight hour on the porch of the church." "Watch for what?" asked Dr. Henderson. "For the phantasms of those of the parish destined to die over the following 12 months. "And does the village make an outing of it?" "Oh, no. No one from the village goes near the church on the eve of St. Mark's. None but the old believe in the silly superstition, and the old won't go for fear of what they might see." She gave Catherine Baxter a wink. "But it would be a curious experience if a death were expected, would it not?" And with that, she was gone in a whirl of red and yellow to dispense pearls of unlooked-for wisdom among her other party guests, leaving Dr. Henderson and his lady to once more exchange glances. But this time, the glances were speculative, for now their thoughts were filling with a wild surmise. On St. Mark's Eve, Catherine Baxter and Dr. Henderson arrived at the church in the doctor's sulky, just as the stroke of 12 sounded on the village hall clock. All was quiet and dark, as was the small churchyard, deserted and still, the headstones showing as dark, brooding shadows seeming to hump out of the ground. The two crept to the church porch, there to wait and watch for whatever may happen. The midnight wind blew cold from across the cemetery and swirled into the porch and about the lovers as if to warn them of what was to come, implore them to leave while they still could. Neither spoke, but only huddled together for warmth and to ward off fear, especially the fear of what they expected, even hoped, to see. They did not have long to wait. The wind suddenly dropped. Somewhere out in the night, in the direction of the churchyard, came the long, loud squeak of the lychgate opening, and presently, through the darkness, a form, somewhat stooped, came silently and with slow, measured steps along the path to the main door of the church. Huddling there, Mrs. Baxter and Dr. Henderson shrank back as it approached, a bent, shrunken thing in a gray, winding sheet, gaining definition as it neared. It was old Baxter. Even with the ravages of illness, death, and the effects of the doctor's potions upon his features, he was still recognizable as the aged and despised husband. The door to the church swung back of its own accord, and the corpse, looking neither right nor left, stalked by the pair and entered, leaving behind the sickly scent of corruption. The door closed silently behind it, and for an instant, every window of the church lit with a brilliant, unearthly light. Then all was still and dark again. For a moment, the two stood on the porch, too astonished to move or speak. Then, as their senses returned, an evil glee stirred within them, conquering their fear. They embraced, kissed, and laughed together with a wicked laugh, knowing their deed would be fulfilled. Sick old man Baxter would die, and his ungrieving widow would be free to remarry, to live and be happy once more. Taking her by the hand, Dr. Henderson raced Catherine Baxter with flying steps back to the sulky and galloped away, their hearts filled with joy and dark passions. In later days, as they sat in their separate places pondering their future, they may have regretted so hasty a departure from the church porch. If they had stayed a while longer, they might have seen two more phantasms, each in its gray winding sheet, slip through the squeaking lychgate, troop up to the church door, and enter, smelling of death. They might have seen that it was themselves, their heads lolling lopsided as they stepped, the hangman's rope still close about the neck. Rick Kennett has 5 books on Amazon, 2 novels, The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea, and Presumed Dead, a novella, In Quinn's Paddock, and 2 collections, The Dark and What It Said, and 30 Minutes from New Hell. In addition, he recently had his novel Presumed Dead serialized by the podcast Cast of Wonders. Links in the description. Hey guys, I'd like to give a big welcome back to author Rick Kennett. He's had quite a number of stories on the show, all of them well worth the listen. If you're interested, I will be sure to leave links to them down in the description. Or if you're on YouTube, you should be able to see a link to his playlist right up in the corner there. And just a reminder, Tall Tale TV is now available on YouTube, Facebook, iTunes, and your favorite podcast app. For more information, feel free to visit me over at talltaletv.com. So until next time, thanks for listening. I'm Chris Herron, and that's it for today's Tall Tale TV.